Hi everybody, welcome back to ScottiesTech.Info. I'm Scotty with my co-host Furry Cletus. And today I want to talk about something slightly different. Essentially, programmers' brains. Because I was thinking about this recently. I mean, I'm a programmer, and that's kind of like my day job, and you probably know some programmers if you are not one yourself, and therefore you probably are familiar with the situation where you interrupt the person doing some coding, and they will emit some sort of combination of snarls or grunts or shrieks, wails, various expressions of unhappiness that they have been interrupted. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. And this has always kind of bothered me because, of course, sometimes you have to go to a meeting, or sometimes you're working at home and your spouse says, hey, you have a child, you should play with your child, and you're like, that kind of thing. And of course, like, where does this come from? So I've been thinking about it for a while, and I think I figured it out. Basically, when you program, what you're actually doing is, it's very different. If I'm studying history, for example, I know so-and-so gave so-and-so a bag of money, or there was a war and it involved this or that or the other thing, right? If I'm studying, if I'm a journalist or something, I know that, again, this person gave that person a bag of money, bribes occurred, this occurred. You have images, you have videos, you have, locations, that you've seen pictures of or you've been to, so you have all this visual imagery. When you're programming, especially if you're a visual type person, you have no actual imagery. All you have is thousands of lines of code, which are nothing more than, code is nothing more than characters on a screen. It's basically a text file. And of course you do have kind of a reference point, visually speaking, but it's usually like a user interface, let's say. So when you click this button, you want to make something happen. But that something that's happening is actually very abstract, because like I say, all it is like tons and tons of lines of code, and broken down usually into various functions, and those functions are calling each other, and both inside and outside those functions there are variables that have certain data that's being used by the functions to do stuff. And sure, that's interfacing with, say, like a user interface for a web application or something, but it's all like all wishy-washy, it's all very abstract. And then on top of it, you have the problem that there are further layers of abstraction, because you have things like variable scope, where the variable in this scope, or you have, means something different than it does in the global scope, or you have, like closures and things, and all these sort of levels of abstraction on top of the complexity of the code itself. So why do programmers have to concentrate so hard? Well, basically, because it's all about short-term and long-term memory. So when you sit down and you work on a piece of code, especially, well, it doesn't matter if it's one that you've written in the past or it's someone else's that you're getting up to speed on, you have to stare at it repeatedly, and you have to get all the functions and variables and things in your mind, because you have to understand how it works. And pretty much the only way to do that is to repeatedly stare at it. As you repeatedly stare at it, which is a very intense process, especially because you have no sort of visual reference or audio reference or anything. You can't use any other part of your brain. It's just like memorizing words on a page, right? As you do this over and over again, that chunk of code kind of moves into your long-term memory. It's kind of like you have to take a photocopy of it and store it in your long-term memory, so that when you're working on this part of the code, you have to remember this function down here, and you literally start to memorize every single line of the function, and you remember what every single line does, even though you're not looking at it anymore. So that's the theory, you see, is that there is no reference point, there is no visual aid, there's nothing that can allow your brain, like you've heard of mnemonics, right? Like if you want to remember some historical fact, well, you can create a mnemonic, and you imagine like a donkey with a hat, dancing the tango or something, with a chicken or whatever. And when you do that, you're using kind of a visual trick to help you remember. I do this all the time, it's very handy. But I can't do that with code because it's just a bunch of characters on a screen. So you have to sit there and like focus, and then of course someone comes and interrupts you, and it's kind of annoying, right? I should probably add that I was thinking about it, and the closest thing I could come up to, or that I could come up with that would be sort of similar is if you're a lawyer. Because I would imagine that, like, sure, there's like prosecution and defense, and there's like evidence and stuff, but most like law is basically a bunch of text out of books. So how do you like remember all that? So to me, it would seem like, yeah, that would be kind of a similar problem where like you're intensely focused and you don't want to be interrupted because you literally have to like use your silly human mind to photocopy these pages of text and then understand them on a very abstract level. Anyway, so what can you do about this? Well, what I have found is that when someone interrupts me, tip number one, it's very good to stop. And when the interruption comes, of course, you feel like you have lost control of the situation and you're intensely focusing. So what you do is you say, okay, 5 minutes. And right there, you've just basically taken control back of the situation, which minimizes your irritation. Very useful. Then what you do is you immediately write down, either in a comment in the code or on a scrap of paper, whatever's handy, scribble down everything that's going on in your head. What function you were going to modify, what you were going to do next, your whole train of thought, everything you can think of, scribble it down as fast as possible. Then you go off and go to your meeting or play with your kid or whatever. Then when you come back, you have a reference point that kind of ties into your memory and helps you pick up where you left off. Plus you're less irritated because you've sort of taken control of the situation back, and there you go. At least for me, that works pretty well. The second thing is, don't always assume that being forced to take a break from it is a bad idea, because actually, I'll link to this in the description, but I wrote an article about working smarter, not harder. And here the idea is that basically we code until like 2 o'clock in the morning, or 4 o'clock in the morning, or 6 o'clock in the morning, or we get up super early in the morning to code for the simple reason that there are fewer distractions, right? There are fewer interruptions. There are fewer interruptions to this intense focus required to do what we do, right? So the problem is that sometimes we get obsessed with the problem because you're focusing so hard and you just want to get it done. And there's often a problem with that, which is that it doesn't work very well because you kind of push so hard and you're so determined to fix the problem that you start getting more and more tired and more hungry, and you start losing your focus, but you're so gung-ho about fixing the problem that you don't realize that you should actually just stop and take a break. So the other thing to do is when you're interrupted is actually take advantage of it. And when you're working on that hard problem, first you write everything down, and then before you get up you go, okay, hang on a minute. Here's my problem, here's this. I tried to fix it like this and like that and like this. That didn't work. Okay, so maybe I should try this, maybe I should try that. But anyway, define the problem in your head. This is my problem, and I don't know how to fix it. What am I going to do? And then get up and go take care of your interruption. Also take a shower. That helps. But don't think about the problem when you're doing it. Don't go and like play with your kid and go, should I change that line of code like this? No, like don't think about it at all. If you preload the problem in your head before you stop, and then you go and do something completely different, and you completely ignore the problem, don't think about it at all. Very often you will find that when you get back to your computer and sit down, and you start looking at your notes, and you reload this stuff in your buffer, and you start looking at the code, you'll go, holy crap, I could do this instead, blah, 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 and you start typing and it all just comes out. That's called working smarter, not harder. I don't know how it works. I don't know if it's like, you're subconsciously processing things. I know that our brains don't work exactly the way that most people believe they do. They're pretty fancy tools. So it's kind of like, you're a coder, learn to use your brain more efficiently. I mean, you learn to use, a JavaScript engine or a microprocessor efficiently, so why would you not use your own brain efficiently, right? Anyway, those are 2 tips that hopefully will help you deal with the dreaded coding interruption. So, like I said, I'll put links down in the description to the Working Smarter, Not Harder article, and something else if I think of it. I don't know. But anyway, for more techie tips, see ScottiesTech.Info. Thanks for watching. See you next time.